Next up, ladies and gentlemen, we have Małgorzata Wypych from Diversity Hub's Mental Health Center. Małgorzata, for those of you who haven't watched the first session with Małgorzata, she's a psychologist, a PhD, a specialist in psychological intervention, 12 years of academic background, 9 years in an emergency as a psychological support officer. Hello again, Małgorzata. It's great to see you. Hi.
Hi, it's great to see you too.
How are you today?
I'm very good, really. I feel that I became a little maniac because of running out of time, and my arousal is up, so I have very good mood and a lot of energy. I don't know how come.
Wonderful, because the topic we're going to talk about today is not the easiest of topics, I'm sure you will agree. We will talk about the most difficult of situations that can lead to great many types of mental health crises in companies. Could you give us a couple of examples to begin with? What type of difficult situations are we talking about in the corporate context?
Mm-hmm. First, maybe I will tell you what's the difference between stress and chronic stress and crisis in terms of psychological crisis. Because sometimes when we say psychological crisis, people overuse this. And if we talk about stress, is something that we imagine. We create kind of what if? Yeah, what if happens to me? What will be the next? And in fact, it's not happening at the moment in present time. Yeah, we just create some kind of scenario that may happen to us. And when we talk about crisis, it means that something happened, that we face kind of loss. And those situations that are most tragic, traumatizing, and those situations that happened in our clients' companies, that when it happens, people can't control it. It's kind of beyond possibilities of coping, are connected to having bad news about your mental or somatic health, having bad news about your family member illness, losing a child, losing a close person, a spouse. Also, sometimes there are situations that someone dies in very unknown situation. We can't see the body, or we don't know whether it was natural death or suicide. And we also support our clients in situations like suicide of employee, or someone has grief after suicidal death of family member. Also, those situations that companies and teams find difficult are connected with miscarriage, especially if it was a kind of high pregnancy and everyone knew that the lady is pregnant. Then they also don't know how to deal with it.
Please give me a number, the actual number of types of situations you've been dealing with over the past months and years, because what you're talking about is really critical stress management and interventions from the outside, I would imagine. So how many types of critical situations have you come across, more or less?
In fact, what I've just described during the last year, all of those situations I've mentioned happened in our clients' companies. All of those situations happened.
Mm-hmm.
In fact,
and the way...
Yes?
Yes?
In fact, what I may say, during the last time, every week we are doing some kind of crisis response for our clients.
Mm-hmm. And if I understand you correctly, most of these activities are interventions from outside consultancies, experts, stress management experts, aren't they?
Yes, because I just mentioned those situations when company cannot cope by using their own resources. Because even if they have procedures for this kind of situations, the manager and the HR may know the person in crisis, and they are also overwhelmed by emotions. So external experts are necessary because we are more emotionally stable in this situation. So yes, even if we train companies and even if we equip them with protocols of leading the crisis team in this situation, there is a point: ask external expert for support. Do not take everything on yourself.
And the next question, because you're leading me really to this next question, and it's only fair that I should ask you what lawyers call a leading question. And that is, should organizations feel partly responsible for actually coping with a crisis situation like that? And the leading version of this question would be, why should organizations feel responsible?
Mm-hmm. I think that why they should cope with those situations is that usually, even if it's a crisis of a single employee, it's it touches all the team. Everyone is involved in emotional way. Yeah, so it becomes a problem to address by manager. And the other hand is that if we don't react very fast in this kind of situation, people may have prolonged problems and they will go for a sick leave. And this is a kind of money lost for company as well. And we know from data, it's evidence-based, that people who got at this very first beginning good social support from family for company, they will get better sooner than if they are left without support. And there are some research showing that money invested in creating protocols of help and in also in training people how to give psychological first aid, it's a good invested money. So each dollar that you will invest will lead to even $17 that you can save if you have this kind of strategies. You use external support and psychological support for your people. And there's also another reason why we should react. You know, at the end of the day, when we will look back at our life and we will sum up our successes and failures, one of those things that we mention usually is that we help somebody. So it's just being human that we react in those situations.
And the topic of this conversation of ours is actually about 5 action steps that companies should undertake, because I would imagine it's also a question of values, core company values, because even if you have an isolated crisis situation, other employees would probably see it as a situation where solidarity is not only required and called for, but natural as a response when they see that the company is not responding systemically to an isolated situation like a burnout, even someone unable to cope in the current circumstances. Is not. We don't have to say that enough has happened in 2020 alone for people to feel isolated and more fragile in many ways. So what are those 5 action steps?
Yes, what we suggest is, maybe I will start from stage 2. Because there's a kind of shock reaction at the beginning. Yeah, the news is coming, and there are first steps to be taken, and the first steps I will describe as the last one. Yeah, so after this very first reaction is the second stage would be to create a space for briefing, and usually the team that should gather is a manager of the team that is touched by the problem, HRBP, who is responsible for this team, and external expert. So we do a briefing because we check how they responded on the first step, what actions were taken, how manager feels himself as well. So we try to not only brief them to recognize the needs, but also to check what's the attitude of manager, because he will be the leader in this situation. He will be the one who supports the team as well. And then we also give some tips how to call, how to lead a talk with a person in crisis, because sometimes the company, the manager or HRBP are going to call the family after loss. So sometimes they are so afraid to pick up the phone and just ask the person, what do you need? So during this briefing, we also give some tips how they should call to somebody in crisis, and also how to plan the next step, which means the briefing with all the team. So after calling the employee who is in crisis or the family who lost somebody, the next step is briefing with the team. And again, we also learn how this briefing and passing bad news to the team should go on, what words they should use, how you should use the pauses during you pass bad message. So it's also a kind of procedure. And also what you should say to the team in terms of concentrating on work or giving the team space to cry out some emotions. And sometimes during this briefing with the team, there's already an expert, a psychologist, who gives them some information how to cope in certain stress. And the fifth stage of this action is long-term support. During this briefing with the team, psychologists are able to recognize who is coping in a good way, and they will cope themselves or using their own social support network, and how many people will need additional psychological support. So we offer long-term support for people in certain situations. And so this is briefing with manager and HR, calling the family of the employee who, for example, died, or just calling the person in crisis, gathering information, what he or she needs. Then the briefing with the team, then long-term support. And the very first stage in this process is psychological first aid that requires some competences from people who are first responders. So someone who is the witness of the situation. Yeah, there are many situations in our clients' companies when someone, for example, has a heart attack or there's an accident in the company and someone reacts, someone rescues the person. So those are people who may be in trauma, but also someone got the message. So he needs to approach the person, stabilize them in emotional way, recognize the very urgent needs, just this emergency needs. And this behavior required some skills that I name psychological first aid. So at the very beginning, in fact, what we offer is to train managers to be prepared for this very first message, that they pick up the phone and someone says, my mother died, or I have a tumor. So this is the first stage of this protocol that we prepare for our clients.
You mentioned a number of times, in fact, how important it is to handle the first reaction right, which is really very much like the first impression in different types of situations where it matters, because this is a yes or no situation from at least employees' perspective, when they think, does the company really care about me, or does it just say so in writing in corporate bulletins and company slogans? It's a classic situation where, based on the quality of this response from middle and top management, you see how relatable your company is. So my question is, how can you prepare management for the proper type of first reaction?
So first, what I want to say is most of those managers that I trained, they want to react in proper way. They want to be a good manager who is a good carer and doesn't harm employee by saying something like grip yourself together or it's your private business. Most of them don't want to react in this way. They want to know, what can I do in a best way to support the person to be a good carer, to be a good manager. So they do care about it. And the second thing is that they want to react in a certain way, in a good way, but they don't know how. Even those first words, what can I say to a parent who lost his child? Yeah, they are so afraid of committing mistake. So in fact, how we can prepare them is to show them that they are certain words, that there are some sentences that if you say them, you will not commit mistake, that it will sound supportive to the employee if you use those words. Yeah, if you say to somebody, I understand that the life of your and health of your child is now priority to you, so I understand that you will concentrate all your attention and energy to help your child. Don't worry about the job. We will, manage with your projects. So even saying this sentence is very supportive. So we train managers to be prepared to use those sentences. And in fact, what happens if they know what to say from the very beginning, they hear their voice, okay, I just said something and it sounds smart. They have lowered anxiety, yeah? So they feel that they control situation. So on the one hand, those situations are very rare, but they leave a very strong, memory. They are memorized as hard situations, and if you knew how to behave, you can, get out from the situation without guilt, without overthinking that maybe I should have done something more. So we can prepare managers, even if it happens rarely, we can prepare them how they should behave, and they think, okay, I will have control in this situation.
Małgorzata, the last question I've just thought of asking you might come as the toughest one, really. We're talking about situations here that come as a shock, largely difficult to predict or unpredictable, because when we talk about a heart attack, it's really difficult to predict an incident, a situation like that. But in some instances, which are more prolonged, and they actually require a certain acceleration process to happen, like, for instance, a situation where you're dealing with a suicide, we're dealing with mental problems that accumulate over time and get different types of stimuli on the way. So my question is, how skilled are managers, supervisors, who themselves work under a lot of pressure for performance, for KPIs, for benchmarks, for all those procedures that they have to meet on the way? How skilled are they at detecting trouble early enough, at detecting symptoms of psychological trauma that eventually may result in really difficult type of situation?
Mm-hmm. Usually when trauma happens, so there's really critical incidents, employees say about it, yeah? So it will not be a secret that something really bad happened to them. But if we talk about prolonged chronic stress or the situation that accumulates, yeah, due to the depression, for example, or when someone has complicated grieving or someone just can't handle this overwhelming situation. So I may say that what I've spotted among participants of my training, managers are good at recognizing that someone is not doing well. But the problem is that they don't always know how they should react because they still feel some obstacles and they have some attitudes that stop them from asking. So what we do also, we really encourage people, if you've noticed something, if you wonder, if you have a dilemma, if you overthink about the behavior of your employee because this behavior has changed and you have some worries, go and ask. Yeah, and also we explain what it's so worthy to ask employees about why they behave this way and to just clear the situation, to understand whether there is big problem, because sometimes people get addicted to gaming and they don't sleep, and this is the problem. But sometimes what they show, those symptoms, may really mean something tragic behind. Yeah, so we just learn managers to be more brave in asking straight questions.
I just saw the figures this morning. You mentioned online gaming. I just saw the figures this morning saying that over 13 million Poles are playing online games these days, which the pandemic situation may have even increased significantly as a reaction to isolation and people looking for different ways of relief in the current circumstances. Małgorzata, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, even though the topic we've discussed is really, really difficult. Thank you for finding the time.